If we were to ask the question, what is the God of Christianity, the God of the Bible, like? I wonder how we would describe that God to someone who didn't know anything about the Christian faith. And actually, it's a great question to ask because the Bible is primarily concerned with the question, what is God like, far more than the question, does God exist? And as you ask that question of the Bible, a number of attributes come to the front. First, for example, the God of the Bible is clearly a God who's relational. This is the theme of the whole of Scripture. In fact, we have the God who walks and talks in the garden with Adam and Eve. We have the God who appears personally to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus and reveals his own personal name. And this theme of God being the relational God runs through the whole of Scripture and ends up in Revelation chapter 21, verse 3, where we have this magnificent and incredible promise that in the new heavens and the new earth, God will walk and talk with us again, wiping away every tear from our eyes. And of course, this theme of God being relational is sort of summed up and culminates in the person of Jesus, God with us, Emmanuel. And we see that so strongly here in John 14, where we were this morning. The Bible also uses incredibly relational language to describe God. He's a father, he's a parent, he's a husband, he's a friend. The list goes on and on. He's the relational God who calls us to be in a relationship with him. So what about Islam? Is the God of Islam a relational God? Well, as you read the Quran, you discover that it has a conception of a God who is distant and remote, far removed from us. The Quran borrows the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and retells it, but it removes a God from the garden. Read descriptions of paradise in the Quran, of heaven, and God is absent. And the Quran is very, very clear that God did not take on flesh and walk in the person of Jesus. In fact, the only relationship the Quran knows of between human beings and God is one of master and servant. We are slaves, certainly not children or friends. Now, obviously, I'm a Christian scholar, student of Islam. Maybe I'm being biased here. I'm also British. The British are notoriously, arrogant, aren't we? So don't trust a Brit, whatever you're doing. So don't take my words for it. Let's take the words of a Muslim scholar. I was worried how loud some people laughed at that comment, but there we are. Shabir Akhtar is a very well-regarded Muslim scholar based at Oxford University. Let's read what he says. He says, Muslims do not see God as their father. Men are servants of a just master, but cannot, in Orthodox Islam, typically attain any greater degree of intimacy with their Creator. By contrast, Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. Big difference between the God of Islam and the God of the Bible. That God is relational.